Afternoon. Again, great pleasure to be here with the Rencontre économique DEX, and we're talking about competitiveness, European competitiveness, and we have to restore it based on the title of the roundtable this morning. European Union has a roadmap to remain in global competition. So whereas the world is changing quickly, so in many domains, climate, AI, geopolitical tension, and so on and so forth. It changes the world in which we move, and to talk about that, a good panel, beautiful panel, Benoît BAZIN, CEO of Saint-Gobain, BUBERL Group AXA, POUYANNÉ, CEO of TotalEnergies, and Clara WOODMAN, you know, Director General at Morgan Stanley for Middle East and Africa. And we have with us as well Lionel FONTAGNÉ, who is member of the Cercle économistes and director of the LIMIP, which is the macroeconomic institute. Lionel, the floor is yours for the introduction to the roundtable.
Thank you, Marie, and good morning, everybody. So, restoring European competitiveness. In the title, we can see that there is a subject and a problem. This problem has been clearly highlighted by the two reports that you will have in mind, which were published last year, the Letta report and the Draghi report, which raise this question of European competitiveness quite directly. To a certain extent, they've said to us, so what do we do now? So to take this question, we can go back a little bit in time and remember that in 1986, we had the Single European Act, and this was the announcement of 300 measures that aimed to eliminate third funds within the European Union, whereas we thought that these borders had been done away with, and this went through the recognition of norms, etc., harmonization of norms, etc. And it was the end of '92 that was given as a deadline. So from the 1st January 1993, we were in the single market. And so for the past 30 years, we've been in this single market. That's an entire generation that has lived in a single market. And what shows the economic works that of which there are many on this subject is that there were gains on one hand. The gains are there. It was a big success, but also there had been some failures. And these failures mean that we specialized in cumulative technologies, and therefore we missed a lot of technological turning points. We had low gains in productivity, at least compared to the United States. And at the end of the day, therefore, we're kind of lagging behind the States. So some successes and some failures. So all of the gains expected did not happen. And the reasoning that went with this, that was promoted by the economists in what was called the Chechnya report. And this report was called the cost of non-Europe. And this report said we must use the size of the market because we will achieve scale economies, and this will allow us to boost productivity, which will bring growth. So the objective was to reduce the remaining obstacles to the movement of goods, services, people, and capital. So what we see is that one generation later, the question is back on the table in somewhat similar terms, but slightly different also. And just as Marie recalled, because the context has changed. The international environment is different. The internal barriers have not all been eliminated. And so there might also be a problem of method. So what is the real reason of the difficulties we're encountering? Is it this problem of context, which is new, and therefore a policy that is no longer adapted? Is it because we haven't worked well, that the barriers were not eliminated? Or deep down, did we go about it the wrong way? And the actual fact is that it's all three. So the international environment has changed. Of course, no point in hammering that message home. Barriers are still there, and the European Commission recently has communicated a lot on what they call the terrible 10 barriers that are really hurting us, and they're real obstacles to growth. And there was a problem of method, and what is interesting is that the European Commission itself acknowledges this problem of method, putting the spotlight on a need for simplification. We created too many rules, it's too complicated, and we're not working properly with the European budget. And finally, We need to re-envisage how we're going to go about the industrial policy. Is the industrial policy we led in Europe appropriate for the new circumstances? So the European Union communicated last May on this, and they published the single market, our European market in an uncertain world. And this summarizes the change in direction of the European Committee that says we need to rework things and move ahead. So that's what the European Commission thinks. You know what the economists think about it. But what's interesting is to see how our panel reacts to these very contrasted findings, with some successes but also some obvious failures in a certain number of areas.
Thank you, Lionel, for this scope. We can trigger we can start the discussion. We have the Draghi report as a reference document on the way we can improve European competitiveness. So, Benoît, BAZIN, we know the main lines. We did focus on the 800 billion of needs for investment. So what I wanted to ask is what should be taken and what should be left in this report, which proposes a cocktail of solutions. Well, the Draghi report creates a consensus, the shock as to the competitiveness shift in Europe. It insists on several topics, and two I keep in mind. First, what we know, the capacity of Europe to restore its competitiveness while ensuring energy transition. Second point, it puts forward that the cost of energy competitiveness of Europe is off shift versus the China and the US, the electrification of use and the change of energy market in Europe, and often the cost of energy for industries is the first cost item. So, but there are dead angles. The first one, which I want to insist on, there is no issue of energy efficiency, and we know that in the industrial processes, in the building industry, we can gain in energy efficiency. Energy will remain expensive, we know that, but of course it will give competitiveness, purchasing power. If I take the building industry, we can improve decarbonation. You know, building is 40% of the carbon production. You know, it gives sovereignty to Europe for 400 billion of import of fossil energy. So the energy efficiency can bring a lot. You know, we have to double the energy efficiency, and you know, there are things that do not make so as an aspect that remain blocked. Draghi report insists on key technologies and issues of the future. It's a lot of challenges, but we don't want public policies or industries or forget the existing domains, you know, industrial, which is it's essential industrial domain. The industries of goods, you know, automotive, chemistry, metallurgy. We need these industries for the evolution of Europe tomorrow, and possibly these industries need us to introduce topics of competitiveness of cost. That is the true reciprocity of public markets, being serious on Buy European Act, to introduce CSR criteria on European purchasing or procurement, to have tariffs on, you know, the discussion on the automotive industry. So maybe these industries need that the pure and perfect economic liberalism doxa that has been dominant for 30 years, they are changed, because, you know, change have changed. You know, China is there and things have changed. So governance of Europe is another topic. You know, in terms of method, we can see there is a decision-making process which is clearly off track. We produce consensus before we work on the substance of it. 2 years ago, we talked about the inflation reduction. You know, you know, now in 4 months, we have tackled the tariffs. So long time ago, we did the community of coal and steel, you know, and with 9 countries, we need a single market, but we don't want the smallest common denominator of 27 should just allow us to go very slowly or to have a sort of a soft consensus. So we need to pull out of the purely competitiveness issue, and which was seen purely in terms of the market of European consumers and not European European sovereignty and the CSR criteria. Last topic I will discuss is that of competence and skills, especially, you know, engineers, technicians. In France, if we want to be competitive in the industry, we need 50% of technicians and engineers more. So you see there will be investment in public institutions. Those are the three dead angles: energy efficiency, existing domain industry, and ability of the European to make decisions rapidly with several speed, but maybe review the European institutions, which today are somewhat hindering the decision-making process, and discuss the skills and competence.
Patrick Pouyanné, we've talked about a lot. With you, we can talk about the cost of energy that you were talking about, far higher than in the States and in China. How can the European economy as a whole remain competitive within this context? Well, I think that we have to come back to things that are quite simple in this energy debate. First of all, the cost of energy in Europe will never be as competitive in the United States for a very simple reason. The United States have all the natural resources. They're the first oil producers, the first gas producers. They have space to do renewables. They even have coal. It's a country that produces energy and can control its cost in a very competitive manner. Europe, to the contrary, imports energy. We import our energy, our fossil fuels today, and even though we talk about nuclear, we will still need to import uranium one day. When we talk about renewable energies, there are the critical metals and all of the supply chains. And the big difference between China and Europe in decarbonized energy is that China has a holistic vision where they control the entire supply chain, including the refining of critical metals, whereas in Europe we only look at the end point. But this doesn't mean, and I think that in this debate, yes, the cost of energy is higher in Europe today than in the United States and in China, but there are a number of markets in the debate. If we talk about European competitiveness, we're talking deep down about industries and companies. In Europe, there are two types of companies. There are the companies that export, and there are the companies, a lot of SMEs that live within the European fabric. And in the export companies, there are those that are energy intensive and need to consume energy. The real subject where we have a problem of competitiveness today is not the companies that are on the domestic market and the fighting with the same energy costs. It's those who wish to export. It's steel, automobile industry, refineries as well, where there is a question of competitiveness of the price of energy. And we will set up from a higher cost level, but the question is for European states. Do the European states want to implement policies, for example, by detaxing this energy that will be consumed by industries that export and are highly energy intensive, or not? When we look at what Merck Chancellor wants to do in Germany, he has a program, and so it means that politically we must explain to the consumers and electors that yes, their energy will cost a little bit more than for the industrialists. But of course, the mission of all energy producers and states is to lower the cost of energy as far as possible. It so happens that we were subsidized by the Russian gas that has disappeared from the mix, and it won't be back tomorrow. So I think that to do this, we must, of course, because the debate and price is a question also of security of supply. So everything that we can produce on our European land is welcome. That's nuclear, it's renewable energies. We need all of this. But we must be able, and this is my last message to Europe, we must now say that the only way to progress is not to reason as we do now at the border of each country. There is a European continent, and we must really develop. We must come back to the founding fathers. If we want to create a Europe of energy by together considering the European territory as being the territory. For example, we don't want to build wind turbines in France, but Germany likes wind turbines, so let's build those in Germany and create nuclear plants in France and organize interconnection between the countries. We must invest. And to think that we will industrialize France because we want to keep our nuclear power for us, well, it so happens that former nuclear power and the existing nuclear power that has been there for 40 years is very competitive. But the new nuclear power we wish to build costs 100 to 120 megawatt. And so we need to put some figures to this. And we can't mix everything up. But I think that nuclear power is part of the mix, but we must assume what we want to do. And the only way for me of becoming competitive, if we believe in Europe, is to each accept in their countries, to think European, to optimize the cost of our European energy. Once again, we're all in the same boat. We import some energy, but the question is the battle between European countries and to know who is the more competitive. And that's a real problem. Quite honestly, we're all dwarfs faced with the United States, China, and the big countries of the Middle East. So if we don't understand that we need to develop the single market in all of its dimensions, and I will come back to that later, I think that we're missing the point. So indeed, we must believe in an economic European sovereignty and economic European security, these concepts that are really very deep and very positive. And then we need to onboard the citizens. So, you know, we created the euro, and not at 27, but a certain number of countries, and it was a big success. So, you know, we know how to lead big projects that are good for everybody, despite all of the concerns there might be.
Because maybe we were able to tell stories which is more complicated. Thomas BUBERL, you know, there will a need for massive investment. We talked about that. We can't talk about urban competitiveness without talking about the mobilization of savings. The creation of a huge capital market is sufficient to make sure that the savings in Europe will serve Europe. Lionel just reminded us that this project is about 20-year-old, and we realized that with in the long term, the quality of the project will not increase. We are now experiencing a shock, and we see that there are new powers around us who invest a lot, massively in new technologies to generate growth, and it's difficult to find our position for us. So Europe basically started awakening, you know, but has not yet gotten out of bed to overcome the challenge. And we have to do it now and not in 30 years' time, because we can't wait for 10 years again. So what do we need to do? Observation, money is here. Money is here, it's in Europe. Money is available in insurance companies, in banks, in savings and loans, in assets management, and our politicians spend a lot of subsidies that could be better directed into investment for growth. You know, money is here. Now, you need to know that there is not more money falling from the sky. We have to talk about a better distribution of the existing money. What does it mean? First, money today is mainly invested in governments. The institutional investors support governments, and with public finance and public deficits, which are rather growing than you know, reducing. So we're not going to change the mix. Therefore, if we want to have money for growth, for more risk-prone investment, well, states have to work on budgetary discipline of their public finance. The only way to get money from the state to finance growth for entrepreneurs. Second topic, risk culture. Today, in Europe, it's better to have your own saving accounts rather than to own the European success, or to be an owner of the European success. We have to change our culture very much as they've done in the US. You know, to be the owner of your own fate, of your own success, it's much better. So therefore, what does it mean? What does it mean? Basically, first, institutionals should invest more in risk-taking ventures, means that there should be small adjustments in the existing regulations. There's no revolution here. Second, we need to push investors, long-term investors, and especially pension funds, into the risk-taking ventures. Pension fund managers have no risk incentives today. depth of the markets. Well, today we talked about, for the last 20 years, we talked about a single market, and we end up with 27 capital markets. So each market must be dealt with differently, and this complexity does not push people to invest in Europe. Again, European states should push for a solution that would align have matching regimes with European market with enough cash flow so that we could or liquidity to invest more in Europe. All this is feasible, but there is a need for a political will.
So Claire Woodman, more globally speaking, what role does the financial sector, what role can it play, what role should it play in supporting European competitivity?
And I really want to build on some of the remarks that the panelists have made, because I couldn't echo more what Thomas was saying about the need for, interconnected markets. I think sometimes we also forget that 4 of the 10 largest economies are in our region. Sorry, that's better. And we lose sight of that. What does the financial market do? The financial market, we have to remember, is the place that helps us build growth, helps recycle capital, helps capital get to those that supply it and those that need it. And when financial markets work exceptionally well, they produce growth and they produce productivity and they produce prosperity. So we've got to find ways to ensure that the financial markets within the European Union all work together and we bring down some of the barriers. One of the key challenges that has been highlighted for many years and was key in the Savings and Investments Union is the fact that the financial markets and fundraising is very, very narrow and concentrated into bank finance and bank debt. And that has to change. When you have an economy supported by financing coming from 2/3 coming from bank loans and bank debt, you have a system that just can't grow and can't supply the capital that all of the infrastructure products, the transition to clean energy, dealing with the issues that longevity is presenting for all of our societies, it just cannot supply enough capital. And so that's why parts of the Savings and Union's investment is really focused on diversifying the sources of capital available to finance and enable Europe to be competitive. It's not all doom and gloom, though. From my seat, we have a lot of interest in Europe, a lot of interest in the fabulous companies and the innovation that's coming out of Europe. But what we've got to do is find a way to ensure that the capital is available there, and also that the savings that are generated, because the savings rate, Thomas, in the European Union is something like 15%, which is dramatically higher. I think the savings rate in the US is about 4%. So there's a significant place that that can contribute and help to aid the flow of capital and competitiveness for the Eurozone. And of course, it has to be calibrated in the right way. And Thomas talked about, the rebalance of risk and reward. And that has to be very careful because we want to ensure that people have savings, but also can contribute to investments for infrastructure. So not all doom and gloom. And I would just finish my answer with a positive upbeat. And as Madame Lagarde said, I think a few days ago, moments of change can be moments of opportunity. So lots to build on.
Patrick Pouyanné, je reviens vers vous. Vous avez tous les deux parlé de besoin de davantage de coopération européenne.
You talked about the need for more cooperation, more political will, if not courage. So what is Europe not doing to give you the means to be more competitive for decarbonation of the rest? In general, what's the message you would like to convey to the leaders, European leaders, and French leaders as well, of course? Well, in Europe, unfortunately, deindustrialization goes faster than decarbonation. The issue is not decarbonation. The point is that do we want to keep the industry and the jobs? The way we're going to decarbonize, but we will lose jobs, industrial jobs. So it applies in France and in Europe as well. Now, I think we need in this, if we open the debate, go back to what Benoît was saying at the origin of the single market. And we built a Europe to fight against inflation and for the consumers. And we therefore deployed politics, especially competitive politics, that means that there is no challenger, European challenger. We have a 400 million market, consumer market, but it doesn't exist in the energy, but in the domain of telecoms and digital, clearly. In the US, you got 4 operators or 5 operators who share 350 million market, consumer market. In Europe, we got 3 or 4 for each country, so that's about 80. None of them has the critical size. None of them has been able to invest. You know, I'm shocked that the European continent and the countries where we have a high level of education, we got a lot of engineers, digital engineers. We have no European digital champion. We companies, we have to put our data with, with in the US clouds and for those issues of securities and safety, in a world of multilateralism and such that, problems of sovereignty, protection become a real issue, economic safety for all our companies. So why don't we have that? Because we spent our time in the last 30 years to consider there were 27 markets. I see my friends, 27 market regulators in the name of, I don't know what, sovereignty. I know the telecom market, where they are, you got to protect a couple of military wavelengths, for the rest, where's the sovereignty? So, bandwidth, sorry. So what I keep from this, so are we able to agree that the sovereignty must be European, and we should have policies not for consumers only, but for jobs, for industrialists, for companies and businesses. And there is a balance to be found. We lost the balance. The consumers are very happy. The price of telecoms in Europe or mobile phone is 4 times cheaper than the US. Simply, you don't get the rest of jobs and innovation that come with it, because that's a virtuous circle. If you want to do cheaper, you don't create innovation. So let me talk about this. If we want to, what is blocking here? And I think the retro shock, the backlash we experienced in the for 5 years. Let's not be naive. Multilateralism is over. The ideal world without borders, even major powers for the many domains shrink back to themselves. We Europeans have to change our algorithm, and we have to rethink about our sovereignty. But together, if we fall in the pitfall that we will do it alone, we won't go very far. So it applies to digital for energy, it applies to capitals for markets. Now, why can't we have one major European financial hub? Because then we enter about, is it Frankfurt, Paris, Milan? I'm not sure that this is the topic, because when you look at the European companies at the end, we're going to go to New York. So let's think about that. So, well, I mean, this is what we see. We, European companies, I'm optimistic, but as long as we move on to do action, and especially for this competition policy, we have competitive policy, we have to reshuffle it. We have to accept the idea that not Alstom will marry with Siemens when we say things like that. At the end, we stopped the creation of a European champion. We have to create European champions, otherwise we will not achieve competitiveness. And then if there are European champions, there will be positive impacts for the SMEs. We will know how to irrigate industrial fabrics from the countries. I'm sure I represent a large corporation, but I do believe that. This is a call. Well, we won't do it if we're 27. Yes, of course we can. To be 27 is too complicated. Fair enough. I agree with that. So politically, with 27, we cannot move forward at the same economic rhythm. But we should make step forward with a goodwill coalition, as we did for the euro, and slowly we will receive others in the various domains on capitals. If we agree, of course, we well, it's better that within the first one there should be France, Germany, or the large countries, and then we will solve the problems. But never mind. The model of 27 unanimity and to get everybody on board, this cannot be a basis to improve European competitiveness. I mean, look at who we have against us. The U.S. federal state. They can't even get their big beautiful deal in 2 months, but they did it. They did it in a consensus that 2 months. And the Chinese, we're dealing with a monolithic, fully controlled system. So our system is all beautiful and exotic. The various people don't want to. Well, the role of a leader is to bring a vision, to carry a vision, and to onboard people. Did everybody want euro? No, half of the French didn't want euro. Are people complaining about euro today? No. Did the French wanted having their income tax taken from the salary directly? Well, now everybody's happy. So we have to go beyond the argument which are here. People don't want that. Well, leaders are here to come up with a vision. You're brave if you have a collective vision, and the vision today is to prevent Europe from turning into an amusement park.
Attendez, gardez le micro 2 secondes, Patrick Pouyanné.
So please keep the microphone a few moments, Patrick Diamé. So the message was for the European leaders and the French leaders. Yes, the French leaders, which with the big major countries of Europe, must, when he's coherent in what he says in Paris and in Europe. But I think that he's there to carry the vision for France, and he must do everything he can to create alliances, in particular with our German friends and also the Italians and other major countries. But you must be brave and you must carry forth this vision and not just say, I need more Europe when you're around the European Council, and then in Paris when you come back to France say, well, yeah, the Europeans are doing whatever. It doesn't work. Let's be brave together. Otherwise, I can only see a slow deterioration. At the end, the big companies that we are, of course, we're profoundly French first and then European, but we must also take rational decisions for the future of our companies. And if we have the feeling that people are saying to us, well, additional taxes, terrible regulations, the ecological and energy transition is a wonderful project, but we need to see how we can implement it. Do you think that publishing a 400-page report has made anything better? What allows us to move forward? So the 4 billion that I invest every year in low-carbon energies, the report was useless to me. It took me up 15 days of my year because I had to look at it. So let's think about what we want. Let us have our feet firmly planted in the real world. What we need to do is invest. So give us the conditions to invest, and the transition is very concrete. But whether we create devilish rules to know whether hydrogen is green and red or blue, I don't understand. And another example, which is entirely absurd: cybersecurity in the electric grid and solar farms. In the United States, there's one rule. It doesn't look it up. It's a rather technical micro subject, but it's the same everywhere in the United States. So now I have the rule. I know what I must do to hook up my solar farms to the grid. And wherever I am in the United States, I do the same thing. In Europe, there's a directive, and the directive was turned into 27 texts. They're not the same. And so even on such a subject, for each of the markets, Germany, Spain, France, I'm obliged to have cyber specialists to connect my solar farms. Do you think that's serious collectively? So it looks silly, but that's what we're up against. And so when I have to allocate renewable investment capitals, where do I go? So as I'm a bit silly, I still invest in France and Europe, but there you go.
Benoît Bazin, se donner les moyens de...
So, can we invest and to have No, it means that we have to change the Green Deal again, to do amendment, to think more wisely, more sensibly on all these topics. We could have an impact on the European competitiveness, in fact. Back to what I was saying at the introduction, change the economic doxa, European economic doxa. I mean, economic liberalism in the last 30 years is not what China and the US do. and speed and pragmatism in the execution. That's it. Then for the Green Deal, well, we do have something, and I think we are able to improve the competitiveness of companies in Europe while ensuring the Green Deal. But realize that in Europe, globally, in all industries, half of the profitability, we have half of the profitability of what we had in the US. So, you have choice of the profitability of the capital. So, Green Deal exists. We should not stop it. We don't have to add anything. So, we have to find competitiveness within the Green Deal. And in fact, European companies are kind of ahead when it comes to technological innovation, know-how, attractiveness. So let's not waste our time by going back 10 years on this topic of Green Deal, but we should apply it in a pragmatic manner quickly for the entire single market. And this is very important to make headway quickly. And, execution speed, pragmatism, and of course, union of capitals, energy policy, 3, 4, 5, we'll move on. The rest will follow.
I can't agree with Benoît. I think that the Green Deal we need to look at in the light of what we can implement. I think that we're too presided over by this question of 2050. We've desynchronized from the rest of the planet, whether we want it or not. We mustn't lose our ambition, but we must find the right pace. And what people are saying about the energy is they want cheap energy. They want the Green Deal, but it has to be cheap. So we must find a way of rereading the text with this in mind. And so I'm a little bit surprised when we're talking about competitiveness in Europe and the Draghi report in the state. Europe says, well, we have to achieve minus 90% by 2040. I understand the science, but I can tell you that it won't help us. So I think that at one point we need to review all of this, in the light of competitiveness tests. I think there's a problem of pace in what we want to do. And doing it alone against the rest of the world, well, I'm sorry, but it won't manage the problem of climate. But we already have the Green Deal. The minus 90 was an invention without asking the companies. Yeah, they just invented it. So on one hand, you have the Draghi report that talks about competitivity, and the other side, they tell you minus 90. Yeah, we should execute things without creating new things, because let's be clear, when I say this, it's not because I want to stay at minus 55. We need to progress. It's a question of the trajectory. And you're right. There's a European roundtable. We spent hours talking, and we're never consulted. So Claire Woodman, well, both of you can continue later on to talk about this. Claire Woodman, what initiatives should political decision makers, or should they favour to guarantee that the capital market of Europe count among the most competitive in the world? We're really challenged, so...
On that exchange between Benoît and Patrick, and say for the capital markets, one of the key things is it's just so fragmented across EU 27. And so one of the key things that we have to do is reduce these barriers and ensure that there really is a single market. And actually, I was looking at some IMF data which suggested that the administrative barriers across EU 27 could actually represent a sort of tariff or a barrier of representing over 100%. And I didn't actually think that that could be quite right. It couldn't be that high. But just listening to the discussion that we've just had, you can see that actually, absolutely, that's the case. So fragmentation of markets is not helping competitiveness. The second point I would make is that it's absolutely key to get this stuff done at faster pace. So this point on simplification in the competitiveness compass, let's get on and make some of these changes sooner. Of course, I do feel that the regulation of the financial services industry is an impediment to competitiveness and growth. And I am not one who ever suggests that we should compromise financial stability, because banks and financial services companies play such an important role in the economy and can also actually end up being an amplifier of any kind of risk. So it's absolutely careful that we have to have in mind financial stability. But we've got to enable banks to be competitive with the rest of the world here in Europe. And I would just say, the Savings and Investments Union proposals have lots in there that's really important. The securitization reforms are just one piece of it. They are really important and critical, but they're not the sole thing that is required to get capital markets here really vibrant, to enable all of these companies to have a lower cost of capital and be able to raise capital in this region rather than allowing it to eke out to the US and be invested. There's nearly $10 trillion of US assets which are held by European holders. We should make sure that we're not losing that capital.
Thank you.
Thomas Jobel, to close with you. So I'm asking a question about what should Europe do? How should it create, what environment should be created, what's the role of politics, what message do we convey? So do you think the role of public power is to set a heading, but shouldn't it first leave room to the businesses so that they will be competitive themselves?
So, I will ask you the question for the French. What are the two events in the past 5 years which made you proud? Notre Dame, the Olympic Games. So, what happened in both cases? In both cases, the state established the framework, and companies and citizens got on with it. And if we look at the link with Europe, the miracle that our fathers created, the first article was that of subsidiarity. A problem must be solved, or where its origin lies. Where do we stand today? In a Europe of local micromanagement, and in a Europe without destiny. If you ask your parents the question, what is Europe? They will say, peace. If you ask me the question, Europe is Erasmus. If I ask a question about Europe to my kids, they say, why are you asking me this question? And that is the problem. Europe has extremely well succeeded in creating a space of protection. Its social contract is unique in the world. How can we become a power of growth? But there are a few top subjects to solve. First of all, you can't regulate before you've explored. I think that AI is an extreme example. Yes, we're all discouraged by the fact that the major Americans have already invented everything, but it's not true. DeepSeek is not a threat for us, it's an encouragement. The Chinese, if everything is true, have succeeded with existing technology in leapfrogging. So what prevents us from doing the same thing? And with the need to be more productive, there is no place that is better positioned to do it than in Europe. Second subject, I will 100% agree, the Draghi report, the Letta report, a tremendous piece of work. But in your company, when was the last time that you developed your financial plan before having decided the strategy, before having decided on your vision, and before having decided on your operating model? There are some topics missing there. And third, the private sector must support. I think that your question is absolutely right. Leave room for the companies. We have the solutions, we have the will to help, and we're there to help meet this big challenge. If I take my sector, there is one big challenge of social inclusion. We can help. If I take my sector, climate risks, the lack of insurability, we can help. Give us room to help.
Merci. Alors, on a le temps pour une ou deux questions.
We have time to take one or two questions.
We've got time for one or two questions. Young lady with the microphone, so lots of hands. Sir. Short question, no comment. Hello, thank you all for your talks. I'm a business manager, small SME. in the restoration of historical monuments. My question is that how today can we invest in risk in a country where everything is done so that you take no risk and you are educated in a system where eventually you learn from the start that you should not take risk. This principle of precaution which has infused our society, how can we change that?
Je suis
100% agree, but we should not stop there. We must help our citizens to take risk. How can we do it? Well, there are the state guarantees. So state bonds, maybe we could say the state will give a guarantee so that people will take the habit of, will get used to take risk. We got a lot of people who, example, who took risk, and maybe we have to give more vision to these people, and with the risk taking, with success, of course, there is the financial success that will come. So maybe we should change the mindset towards financial success. You know, financial success must not create jealousy. Well, we have to remove the principle of precaution from the Constitution, which is a huge signal sent to everybody. And I think there is a space, unlike what we think, and they replace it by principle of innovation. We have to send strong signals. This is what we state from the politicians to send. And we have a system which protects, which, you know, recently I had to respond to a commission and, you know, and then compensate the remove the aid if you remove the tax. And, you know, it's not complicated, so there will be less aid. I'm not asking for it, but simply, you know, the entire system is to compensate a system which is drifting. So we have to find freedom. And, for example, and to come back to Europe and so on, when you come to decarbonation, what we need is to set the objective of drop of emission. Don't give a solution to the company. They don't tell us we want emissions to drop, and we'll deal and find solutions, and we will deliver, and we will trust companies for goods, for just sensibility. So simple principle, trust innovation, set the heading, and we'll find the means. Let's stop regulating everything with micro markets. At the end, they block innovation, like what you think. Second question. Former business lawyer and teacher. I work for business manager. I have a question which summarizes everything I've heard. You say rightly that we have to reform the competition policy. So we have to reform the control concentration, regulation and category for innovation patents. And we have to test before we regulate. That was the case for durability reporting. Mr. Mazar, you did 400-page. Hermes is not like you, but they were synthetic. So, which was indeed suspended for 2 years. On April 2025, it was too complicated for companies. So, shouldn't we simply, for this to work, reform the entire system of the European Union? Is it? All right. How will you change the European Union?
Yes, it's what we're saying in the introduction. There is an institutional question of how the European Union works. It's obvious, and then on a lot of questions, we know that if France, Germany and Italy really put the step forwards in terms of the Union of Capitals, it's other countries will join them. So I'm not sure that we still have a real European defence policy, but we have very good defence companies in Europe. So yes, we need to move ahead, and I'm sure that all of the other countries will follow on. We have to be practical. The Americans teach us one thing, where they have 60% of the answers to the question, and the correct thing says that they move ahead and they correct as they go along. We are lagging behind. We have 30,000 questions, and we're not doing anything. So the speed of execution is a question for companies, and it's also a question for the states and the European Union. Yeah. Well, I think, yes, we must encourage our leaders to go in the right direction. The right direction for me is more European single market, greater integration, and allow companies to believe in it. Musk has tried to break it all and he didn't manage, so don't think we're going to go in that direction. I think it's far more deep-rooted. It's linked to a problem of confidence. If you have an employee in a company that's not doing well, more controls won't make them do any better. And that's, the question we must raise. How can we re-establish trust between the state and companies, between the state and society and companies? Lionel Fontagné, I turn to you. A lot has been said. And you have the delicate mission of drawing the lessons from this roundtable today. Well, thank you. Yes, it was very rich. So I draw three things from this. The first, and it was the elephant in the room, if I may, is that Donald Trump, with the questions of tariffs that have of concern for us in the past days, have had the strength of turning us to, making us turn towards our strength, which is that of the European Union. I think it would be wrong. We need to change focus, and even though the question of customs duties is important, to look at how we can move ahead at the European level. So it was said it's coming back to fundamentals, coming back to basics. We have to redo the CK. That's a good idea. So yes, we need a single energy market, a single capital markets. We also talked about telecoms. All of this must be unified at the European level. It's a lot of work, but it's something which is quite possible. And in addition to coming back to basics and fundamentals, there's a new subject which is related to the change of a European environment, which is that of European sovereignty, in particular in terms of technology. And what I've heard, which makes me really happy, is the fact that we mustn't give up. What was said on leapfrogging, the fact of, jumping one technology to go to a new technology is very important. It's not because we're not good in one area that in the future that will still be the case, quite simply because technologies have changes in directions, and we can use this to come back into the race. So that's the first learning. The second learning is that we can have a quite contrary reading of the recent events. It's an opportunity. What is happening to us with this harshening of the surrounding world. And this opportunity obliges the European Union to really, gather them together and change methods. And changing methods, there is a tension that has come out of our discussions. We want to move ahead forwards, but to move ahead faster, it's easier if there is a Europe that works at different speeds. But if we want to unify everything within Europe, we can't have a Europe which is working at different speeds. So what was possible for the euro is not necessarily possible for the telecoms or for the energy market. So there's a real tension there. And then there's also tension around the question of objectives and calendars. We've talked a lot about the Green Deal, and the question here is the horizon of economic policies. Everybody agrees on the objective, everybody agrees on the endpoint. The question is at what speed can we get there and how? My third point is something which was mentioned, this study of the International Monetary Fund that puts a figure to the European barriers. Personally, I think this study has a lot of defects, but it has the advantage of advancing this debate. So we can look at things from a different angle. We can say, let's look in the 170 European industries, and that includes services. If we have this level of granularity, let's look at in the 170 European industries, how each of the 27 member countries have taken advantage of the opportunities brought by the single market. And then we can say, well, now we're going to do a tremendous piece of work. We're going to make sure that not each of the 27 can be first of the class, because that's not possible. But what would happen if each of the 27, each of the 170 industries were in the first 25% in the class? And the result is very interesting there. We would double the gains of the single market, and that is the figure, I think, that we can leave Park Company with a form of optimism. Everything that's happening is very problematic, but it's an opportunity to seize this low-hanging fruit. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you.